Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to do something kind of wild. We're going to merge abstract theoretical physics with hard economic data from the Cleveland Fed to uncover a really surprising truth about post-pandemic wealth. Now, I know physics and economics sound like an unusual pairing, right? But stick with me, because by the end of this, you're going to see exactly how the laws of thermodynamics can actually explain the money sitting in your bank account right now. Here's a quick look at our roadmap for today. We'll start with the wealth exchange game, move on to the magic growth dial, examine post-pandemic inflation reality, uncover a surprising wage win, and finally ask the big question, does the tide rise? So let's start with a question. Did post-pandemic inflation absolutely destroy the purchasing power of the poor? I mean, it's a narrative we hear literally all the time, right? Prices went way up, therefore the people with the least amount of money must have suffered the most catastrophic financial losses. It makes total intuitive sense. But instead of just relying on our gut feelings, we're going to look at some really rigorous data to test that exact assumption. Well, let's dive right in, because here is the counterintuitive truth. Recent economic growth actually favored the bottom 40% of earners. Yeah, you heard that right. They were left with a net increase in purchasing power. Despite experiencing the highest inflation in 40 years, the post-pandemic economy generated an outcome almost literally no one expected. To understand exactly how on earth this happened, we've got to zoom way out. We need to look at the economy not through the lens of a politician, but through the lens of a physicist. Part 1, the wealth exchange game, modeling the economy. To understand our current reality, we first need to see how physicists model the economy as a complex system of wealth exchange. Let's look at two models. First up is the yard sale model. Imagine a system where people randomly exchange wealth. It's kind of like flipping a coin, and a fraction of the poorer person's wealth is given to the winner. If you run the simulation long enough, a mathematical certainty happens. One person eventually hoards 100% of the wealth, and everyone else goes to absolute zero. It's a closed, static loop. But researchers fixed this fatal flaw with what they call the GED model, which stands for growth, exchange, and distribution. By injecting a mechanism for exponential economic growth, literally adding brand new wealth to the simulation over time, they completely altered the destiny of the entire system. Moving to part 2, the magic growth dial, tipping the scales. Because you see, simply having economic growth isn't enough. It entirely depends on how that growth is distributed among the players in the system. Physicists represent this distribution using the Greek letter lambda. Think of lambda as a dial that determines exactly who gets the newly created wealth. You can basically view this dial as the fundamental DNA of an economy's growth. When new wealth is generated, like, say, an increase in the gross domestic product, it doesn't just magically fall from the sky and land evenly in everyone's pockets. No, it flows through the system, and it's governed by this specific distribution parameter. And here is where the math gets really profound. If that lambda dial is set to exactly 1 or greater, the new wealth flows so heavily toward the people who are already rich that the whole system breaks. Economic mobility just dies. The ranks freeze up completely. But if you turn that dial to anything less than 1, you achieve thermodynamic economic equilibrium. Poorer and richer agents both see their wealth grow, the system stays stable, and people can actually move up and down the economic ladder. Keep this magical lambda dial in the back of your mind as we transition from theoretical physics over to hard economic facts. All right, part 3, post-pandemic inflation reality, Siri meets data. Let's step out of the physics lab and into the real world to look at the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland's data on post-pandemic households. Check out this timeline. It tracks the massive economic roller coaster we all just lived through, showing the huge spike in headline inflation peaking at nearly 9%, before finally settling back down. In April 2020, inflation was basically zero. Then, supply chains choked, demand skyrocketed, and we hit that really painful 9% peak in June 2022. After that, we entered a period of disinflation, settling near 3% and stabilizing through the end of 2024. But remember, this timeline is just the headline average. It's the whole country blended together into one number. Your personal reality? Well, it might have looked very, very different. And the data proves exactly that. The bottom 40% actually experienced significantly higher inflation rates than the wealthiest group. Why? It's all about the basket of goods they buy. Lower-income households spend a much larger percentage of their total income on absolute necessities, things like housing and food. And those are the exact things that spiked the hardest. The Cleveland Fed's research shows the bottom 40% bore a much heavier burden, facing up to half a percentage point more inflation than the national average, while the top 20% actually experienced slightly less inflation than the headline rate. Which brings us to Part 4, the surprising wage win, outpacing the pain. If the bottom 40% face the absolute worst inflation, you might expect total financial ruin, but the wage data tells a completely different story. And boom, here is the plot twist. Look at these peak nominal wage growth rates. In late 2022, wage growth for the bottom 40% exploded past 7%. They substantially outpaced both the median and the top earners. Yes, it's true the bottom 40% paid more at the grocery store and for their rent, but their paychecks were growing at an absolute breakneck speed. Employers were fighting so hard for labor that lower wage workers saw historical nominal wage growth. At its peak, their wages were growing a full percentage point faster than the middle class, and nearly 3 percentage points faster than the top 20% of earners. It's a real game changer. Part 5. Does the tide rise? Calculating purchasing power. To find out if this massive wage growth actually offset all that higher inflation, researchers had to calculate the net change in purchasing power. So, the Cleveland Fed researchers meticulously harmonized the data using these 3 steps. Step 1, calculate absolute household earnings by taking wages times hours worked. Step 2, equivalize those earnings based on household size, so we're comparing apples to apples. And Step 3, subtract the exact inflation rate experienced by that specific income group. Now, this last part is absolutely crucial. You can't just compare national average wages to national average inflation. It just doesn't work. You have to subtract the specific higher inflation rate that lower income earners actually paid for their specific groceries and rent right out of their specific wage gains. And the result? Positive 4.5. Astonishingly, the bottom 40% reached the end of 2024 with a 4.5 percentage point net increase in their cumulated purchasing power since 2019. That means that even after paying those highly inflated prices for food and housing, the massive surge in their wages more than covered the difference. They literally have more buying power today than they did before the pandemic even began. So, that popular narrative that inflation completely destroyed the working class, it's simply not supported by the math. Just look at these final cumulative numbers. We can clearly see that the post-pandemic economy actually gave a larger net purchasing power boost to the bottom 40% than it did to the top 20%. Now, the top 20% also won, seeing a 3.5-point increase in their purchasing power, but the bottom 40% beat them by a full point. During the peak of inflation back in 2022, the top 20% actually saw an erosion of their purchasing power for almost a year before it recovered, while those robust wage gains at the bottom acted as a powerful shield. Connecting our real-world data right back to our theoretical physics model, we have a perfect match. It proves that an economy can indeed lift everyone up, as long as that growth dial is positioned correctly. Remember our magic lambda dial from the GED model earlier? The physicist calculated that as long as lambda is less than 1, everyone in the system experiences growth, and economic mobility thrives. And the Cleveland Fed's hard data from the last 5 years shows us a real-world example of exactly that phenomenon in action. The tide rose, and because the wage distribution strongly favored the bottom 40% during the cycle, all the boats were lifted. So, the post-pandemic labor shortage forced the lambda dial below 1 organically, which gave incredible wage power to the bottom 40%. But as the economy normalizes, how do we make sure that dial doesn't creep back up? It leaves us with a critical question to consider. If the post-pandemic economy naturally set our growth dial below 1, what policies will keep it there for the next decade?